Why did Jesus have to die? I think lots of Christians are puzzled by that question. St Thomas actually gives lots of different answers to that question. Christ's death was a sacrifice. By Christ's death, he paid a ransom for sin, and so on. The answer St Thomas seems to favour, he explains it first and usually was very careful in the order in which he presented things, putting the most important questions and answers first. The answer he seems to favour is one I'm guessing you've never heard before. But before we get to that, let me give an answer that St Thomas does indeed give, and which has historically been very important. It was an answer invented by St Anselm of Canterbury. The idea of St Anselm is that sin creates a debt of humans to God in justice. Imagine some boys are playing football and one of them kicks the ball through the window of the man across the road. That creates a natural debt of the boy to the man. He ought to pay for the window he broke. In something like the same way, Anselm thought that sin, which destroys the right relationship between humans and God, creates a debt. Human beings have a duty in justice to God to repair the damage. The problem is, the damage done is literally infinite. Our sins put an obstacle in the way of the infinite love of God. But humans are finite. Nevertheless, the debt is owed by us, and only we can pay it. This led, said Anselm, to God sending his own Son. The Son, as human, can pay the debt for us. But the Son, as God, has a life of literally infinite worth. When he offers it to God, he can pay this infinite debt due to God. In our analogy with the boy who broke the man's window with his football, perhaps the boy cannot afford to pay for the window. The man still ought to be paid. His window is broken. So the son of the man pays instead of the little boy. That's not perfect, because it misses what is in some ways the most exciting part of Anselm's picture. God's Son doesn't just pay the debt, but he pays it by becoming one of us, so that he can pay it as human. What about St. Thomas's favoured answer? Let me ask again, why did Jesus die? And realise that from one point of view, the answer is obvious. Wise people know that this is just what happens to recklessly loving people like Jesus. Our world, the world of sin, doesn't tolerate love. Rather, when our world encounters love, it kills love. People who love freely and without holding back always suffer. Viewed from that perspective, Jesus' death can be seen as the inevitable end that faces someone who loves. There is nothing surprising in it. God the Father sends his Son into the world from this perspective, not to die exactly, but to live a perfect life of love. The Father knows, of course, that in the world we've made, to live that life of love will mean death. But the mission he gives his Son is not to die, but to live, fully and perfectly, a truly human life. Jesus does that, Thomas thinks, and he shows us what a true human life looks like. In doing that, he stirs up our love. And Jesus, as a perfect human being, merits eternal salvation by his life of love. That perfect life of obedience and love undoes the disobedience and sin in our lives. The grace which flows to Christ because he deserves it, flows down to us, the members of his body, even though we don't deserve it. And what Christ suffers as a man drives out the sins of his body, the church, because Christ is God. On this account, it is Jesus' sinless humanity that leads to his rejection by us, but in turn that leads to our forgiveness and redemption. What I like about this is that it is the antidote to a picture some Christians paint of the cross as a divine punishment. Some Christians have the idea that Christ is punished by God the Father instead of us. But this view sees the cross, the view I've been expressing, views the cross as an all too human punishment, not a divine punishment at all, the wicked response of the world to a true life of love. By accepting the punishment we have inflicted, Christ wins our forgiveness from God. Tomorrow I want to talk, in my last talk of the series, about the very beautiful gifts God gives to his church, which enable us to lay hold of that grace won by Christ, the gifts we call the sacraments.